Alright, Volume 3 of the David Benatar book video series. It's the end of the introduction. We'll get through that. It's actually the first chapter of the book. And it's basically more of a political argument or, context about, what you're facing in this argument. The pre-existing bias that's just so powerful. About life. Obviously breeders give birth to kids, so breeders breed breeders, and you're basically having to be an aberrant, a black sheep. It doesn't use that word, but I am using it to become anti-natalist or to realize that there's no real potential in this game. You're a non-game player. And you've been bred by a whole lineage of aggressive game players. That's how they've survived, because they've been so aggressively in need of the game. They've been so in love with playing the game. They've had to be, he doesn't say that either, but I'm adding that part. And it's a strong bias that's built into what you're fighting, whether it be, I don't think there's much of a biological bias, but I think the cultural bias is incredibly strong. And it's like the bias of the first thought. The first idea is always going to have the advantage, and to pull it out of its throne, to get the bad king out is always harder, because it's sitting down and it's dead weight and it can hold on to the armchair and all of that kind of crap, and so it's always more difficult to remove than to place. And so ideas can fall into the chair easy, and they can be very hard to extract. And the pre-existing idea of religion, for example, I mean, it's a 2,000-year-old fable, a 4,000-year-old fable, and people are using it as a truth. And it's just, you're saying it's 2011. How is that even possible? Well, it's just because it's so hard to pull that lazy piece of crap out of the chair. It's just advantage to being first, and that's all it really is. And so if it's really just going to be an illogical, disciplined interrogation of the facts, all you can glean from that interrogation is the conclusion that yes, all the value is perceptual. It's all made out of a desire. The more thirsty you are, the better the water is. The less thirsty you are, it almost, if you're unthirsty enough, is repugnant and repulsive to force the water into your mouth. And that's the way we function. And that's the only thing. That's the only engine driving the thing. And it's at this price where, when things are out of balance, or comfort is lost. When you're not chasing a desire, you're running like hell from the suffering that can be incurred, the pain of the biological mechanism creating that repulsive element. We're driven by repulsion and attraction. There's built-in repulsions to protect us from damage, and but unlike the attractions are basically there are needs, but they're needs that are all conditional. You only need food if your body needs more energy to process. But you always need not to, be squished or to have your leg broken. Anyway, so then it goes into sort of like the politics here of Japan and Australia, and how they're subsidizing birth just for stupid reasons, for the Social Security equation, like, oh, we need more workers to take care of the older people. So you have this unsustainable pension program, and how do you resolve it? With some kind of dopey idea like, let's just perpetuate the unsustainability by trying to create more kids. Instead of fixing it, you're just going to feed the unsustainability. I mean, you can't go anywhere with that solution. It's obviously only a temporary solution to the problem, because there is no capacity to keep exponentially growing. So it's just a huge cop-out. It's just a huge run away from reality. Again, it's another, stupid king in the chair, and you can't get the jackass out. Alright, and then it's He even raises a little point here about how even our society gives benefits to people. If there's two people and all things are equal and they need a kidney transplant, the person who's going to get it is the one who has the kids. All these little subtle favoritisms that are built into our society, and all this bias is what we have to work against. We only, we have the problem of just making an argument, but it's an argument in a circumstance where you've got a huge bias against you. So anyway, very rarely do we hear criticism of pronatalism based on what procreation does to those who are brought into existence. So yeah, there's just very little scrutiny to the fact that, the disabled don't exist for any other reason. It's always blamed on nature or disease or some other circumstance. But the fact is, the act of procreating has all these liabilities as a real risk. And that risk is seldom fairly applied to the people creating the opportunity for it. The risk doesn't exist without the action. The action doesn't need to take place. And in the bottom line is you're not creating anything that needs to be. And need is the thing we're always trying to serve, whether we intellectually understand that. I mean, you sort of need to understand reality. Instead, you're a need machine, and that's how you function. And you're attempting to satisfy a deprivation. You're attempting to satisfy a negative condition at all times, essentially, a wanting. And there is no wanting in non-existence. There's nothing that needs to be served. So there's no need. The non-existent do not need to exist. It's that simple. And once they do exist, they will need to exist. And so you're just creating a need that doesn't need to exist. You're just creating another problem that will need a resolution. And a life is a problem. That's just the way it works out. It's a problem in need of resolution. You can't just create something that's alive and sentient, place it somewhere and say it's not a problem. It's instantaneously a problem because it's going to need to be fed. It's going to need to be comforted. And why create the problem? Why create the negative that needs to be fed? It doesn't make any logical sense. So he basically says this in the in this sentence. On my view, there is no net benefit to coming into existence, and thus coming into existence is never worth its cost. Again, like I said, you can do lots of mental testing by just imagining, okay, you have a world, and say there's only, 4 people in it, and you create yourself some little world to live in. You know that it's not going to have much of a sustainability in terms of you're not going to be able to create enough deprivation and interest to keep that sustainable for very long. It would be really interesting from your perspective now, but imagine growing up in it and how stunting it would be and how samey it would be and how redundant it would be and how quickly you would want it to do something more. The game would, like a kid with a game, 4 days after Christmas, it's just not going to do anything for you anymore. And that's the problem with life, is that it is just about having it do something for you. Anyway, all right. So the very end of the introduction is basically a map of an outline of the book, and just kind of pointing out what chapters are about what. So it's not terribly interesting. Kind of a reader's guide and that kind of stuff. And so it's chapter 2, which is the next chapter. The introduction, I guess, is chapter 1, even though it wasn't called chapter 1. But anyway, that's the biggie. So that should be the best chapter in the book by the author's own description. So yeah, that should be good. But anyway, yeah, he's arguing. He states it's not because he doesn't like kids or he doesn't like life. It's just that he knows what it is, what it's made out of, and that every life is just a net. It can't really accomplish anything, because all it does is basically, as I've argued, he doesn't say it with that metaphor, but we're milk spillers. We come into the world needing. It's a pile of spilt milk, the need, and then we spend our life attempting to clean up enough milk to make it all worthwhile. And sometimes we can clean up milk that other people spilt, and make ourselves a little bit productive. But isn't that the irony? That to live a really truly good life, generally speaking, you're going to need some mess to clean up. You're going to need some other disaster to prevent. You're going to have to be helpful in some way to some other spilt milk situation. And that's what just makes the whole thing even that much more tragic, is that that's all this really is a game of chasing negatives. And but unfortunately, and it's quite obviously so, I think, but the problem is that this pre-existing bias that says no, life is life, and you know, there's no way you can criticize this God. It's the ultimate sacred cow. Oh, that's the way to put it. Yeah, he didn't put it that way, and I didn't put it that way, but that's basically what we're talking here. This is the biggest sacred cow in the universe, is this idea that because life can get incredibly, because matter can get incredibly eccentric and complex and create an illusion inside of a brain that it needs something, that somehow that deserves reverence in and of itself. And they're not really realizing that anything can be complicated. Complexity is not the same as validity. I could string a bunch of irrelevant letters together and say I create a word, and it's complicated, but it doesn't say anything. It doesn't mean anything. And this presumption that crude forces would necessarily have as the default something that is sensible or logical or balanced is just such a wrong presumption. You should be presuming exactly the opposite, that there would be great imbalance, and maybe something ludicrous would be created by ignorant forces doing creation. And it is preposterously ludicrous. It's as ludicrous as our social systems attempting to solve an unsustainable problem by feeding the unsustainability. We're doing the same thing and attempting to cherish, value the sentient experience by saying the way you value it is to propagate it. And that's not the way to value it. Value would be to respect what it's capable of producing and understanding what it's feeding on, and that's the key. It's eating diamonds and producing cornflakes. And I don't, even cornflakes probably have more value than what a human being can possibly create. But that's the machine we've made. It's eating something incredibly precious, and it's producing something of completely synthetic, delusional value. We're accomplishing nothing but cleaning up the mess we create. I mean, how many times you could just say that all day. Refute that truth. We accomplish nothing but clean up the mess we make. Yeah, it's a zero-sum game. If you do it perfectly, you've gotten back to nothing. At least you're not a negative. But that's not much of an accomplishment. Okay. So, till next time. Enough of a video and such.